there's no shortage of content out there about Gen Z. And most of it is telling us older generations, we're Gen X, and there's the boomers out there. Most of the content about Gen Z is advising us how to accommodate Gen Z, how to interact with Gen Z in the most effective way, because there's no question that Gen Z's influx into the workforce these days and over the past few years has had an impact.
Sure.
And we need to understand that. Certainly we do. But here's what we've noticed is kind of missing from the equation. We haven't seen a lot of stuff out there that's kind of coming alongside Gen Z and saying, hey, buddy, here's how maybe you should interact with the older generations. If you want to be your most effective, and we know you do, here's some tips and tricks about how to interact with the Gen Xers and the boomers out there. That's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
Welcome into the M Squared Leadership Conversation, a space where we talk honestly about the real challenges that leaders face and what it actually takes to lead well in the real world. I'm Michael Hales.
And I'm Michelle Hales.
Welcome in. We're glad you're here. So, Michelle, I love this topic. I know you do too. Gen Z is something that is near and dear to our hearts. You've done a lot of research and study on the issue, reading up. I know you're a big fan of Dr. Tim Elmore,
For sure.
who has really done some what we think is groundbreaking work on researching Gen Z, what makes them tick, all of that kind of thing. And that's what we're going to dive into today.
Yeah.
I kind of set it up in the intro, but there's a lot out there about Gen Z, and we want to take a slightly different angle on it today. So let's talk about what the real issue is. I mean, generational differences are absolutely a thing, and it's something that we as leaders of our generation need to be aware of, and it's something that younger generations also need to be aware of. It's the interplay and interaction among the generations, and I believe we have 5 in the workforce right now.
Could have up to 5, yeah.
It's a thing, and it's something that we need to appreciate and we need to understand, and if we're going to be our most effective, and I know we want to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, so one-way understanding is just not enough. So it's not enough for the older generation to try to understand Gen Z, which I've been an advocate of, but it's not enough to come in and just expect the older generations to adapt to, and I don't think Gen Z necessarily expects that.
No.
But we're all focused on ourselves.
Exactly.
When we show up at work, we're focused on how can I perform well, how can I do well, how can I put my best foot forward. And so we're always thinking about they didn't like me, they didn't get me, they didn't, but if
We naturally default to that we and they kind of idea.
We do. And, you and I have said this over and over again, and if we could do one thing, be curious. That is the key to really understanding each generation, if we can just be curious. And today we just want to talk about how it's not a one-way understanding that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And not that it's a problem, it's just a thing. It's a thing in the workplace that you will work with multi-generations. There's going to be a diversity of people in your workplace, and you've got to know how to at least have some basis of understanding of where they're coming from if you're going to each perform well, and work together and accomplish the mission of your job.
And isn't diversity a wonderful thing?
I
Not
love
only in
it.
generations, but also in ethnicities and cultures and all the different variables that go into ethnicity. If everybody was just like me, it would be a very boring place.
Right.
I'm not a very interesting guy. I can be kind of whatever, but having that variety is what makes this thing so special.
Absolutely.
Okay,
And
so-
having the variety even of experience.
Yes.
Like there's some of us that don't know very much, and there's some of us that know a lot, and you need both of them at the table because they're each going to bring different things.
And that kind of leads into the first point that I think we want to use as a starting place, how Gen Zs might view the older generations. There's this temptation, and this is not new with the current generation. This is a tale as old as time, as you said the other
Absolutely.
day when we were talking about this. Older generations are not just behind the times. And it's easy to look at us like that if you're the younger generation. I mean, this is what happened back in the '60s when the boomers were coming into their own, and don't trust the man, and all the
Yes.
hippie generation. Everything that went along with that is the older generation were squares, and they just didn't get it, and whatever. And this is just the latest version of that.
For sure.
But it's not. There's more to it than that. It's not that we're behind the times. This is the natural order of how things work.
Yeah. So it's interesting how you brought that out. We are just naturally inclined, and the way that it has worked over every generation is that we look to the older generation as the old fogies, how they don't know what's going on right now, and to some degree,
They're right. We
they're
are
right.
old fogies.
We are. But I think it's time that we kind of break the cycle of the way that we navigate the new generations entering the workforce.
Okay.
Let's just stop the way that we've always done it, or the way that we've seen it done in the past, and let's figure out a new system.
Try something new
Let's
and
try
better,
something
perhaps?
new. Yeah.
Okay, I love it. So the thing about this is, we said the older generations are not just behind the times. They were shaped by different experiences, different things that were going on in the world than the current generation. And again, it's always been that way, and it will continue to be that way. But
For
I
sure.
think what's so key here is to appreciate some of those differences and how they manifested in the thought processes, the approach to life, the approach to leadership, the approach to personal interactions and relationships and things. What do you think about that? The environment, the societal things,
Yeah.
and how they
So,
affect us.
We'll always think that we know the other generation. Because it's stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason. But they're assigned to groups, and stereotypes should never be assigned to individuals.
Oh, that's good.
And so, yeah, you can understand where people are coming from in the past, and I think it's really important. And what we could really do is just stop in each workplace and have the conversations, hear what it was like in their past, hear how they grew up, hear what technology, if we could even, I probably could go dig out some old cell phones. I don't know why we keep cell phones. Why are we keeping cell phones? But I could probably go pull out some old cell phones, and it would be fun, and like looking at a museum, like looking at relics for the younger generation. They would appreciate. But that's the kind of thing. Like, understand the pressures that Gen X was under when they came into the workforce. And if you can go back and kind of put yourself on a level playing field and let each other know, like, okay, Gen Z, when I came into the workforce, I was expected this, and this.
Right. Because
And
that's how the world was.
It's how the world was at the time. It's how the generation before us, the boomers, shaped us. And so that's the reason I might be stuck in my mind of how you're supposed to enter the workforce.
Yes. Because we apply our own perspective, don't we,
We do.
to everybody else. And that's a natural thing, and it's unavoidable to a degree. But when we get stuck there, I think is the danger.
Absolutely. So going back to the word curiosity, if we could just be curious enough, and even if you're not brave enough maybe to ask the Gen X or the boomer that's in the workplace what it looked like when they entered the workforce, do a little research. I mean, you've got everything at your fingertips. You could probably, there's all kinds of things out there that we can do to research and see what it might have been like when they entered the workforce, so that we can put ourselves more on a level playing field and just kind of understand. And I think more than ever, Gen X, who is more of the executive type. We're probably the senior leaders
Yeah,
in
you kind
most
of
organizations.
matriculate through the.
Yes. So we're the ones that are, kind of the bosses now, just to put it bluntly. But I think we're trying more than any other generation to understand Gen Z. We raised them, so we are trying probably a little harder than any other generation before to kind of understand. But that's not enough. It's not enough for us to understand them and to keep accommodating.
Yeah,
Every
accommodating is not the answer.
Right.
It's getting that mutual understanding and
For sure.
appreciation, right?
And so that there are some things that Gen X expects of Gen Z coming into the workforce that are still relevant, that are still needed. And Gen Z needs to understand why it's kind of being demanded of them. So I think that's where we try to. The reason we're having this conversation is we want to give tips, not to get on to Gen Z or like come down hard on them, but just
No, absolutely not. It's
this
not
is
about
more
that at all.
of tips of how we can kind of mesh the understanding and the curiosity.
Yeah.
So
So everybody can win.
Everybody
We
can
want
win. We
everybody
want a
to win.
win-win situation for sure.
And here's something I think is important that we want to tag here before we go any further. You mentioned earlier that probably Gen X, us, we Gen Xers are maybe making more of an attempt to understand and really appreciate the oncoming younger generation. That's not to pin roses on us. Again, that's a sign of how society and culture has changed around us, and now the the landscape just invites that kind of thing much more these days than it ever did in the past. So
Well-
it's not that we're doing so much better than straightening our
No.
tie and we're so superior to the previous generations. It's not that. But society evolves around us, and so the times are ripe for that kind of thing to be happening.
It is. And here's a point that, we kind of need to touch on. Accommodation is not always what is best in the workplace. Okay, so Gen X maybe didn't do as well as we should have in raising Gen Z, in that the culture at large, again, stereotypes, so this is at large, promoted participation trophies. So we created this workforce that's coming into the workforce now, Gen Z. We created them where they think showing up is enough.
Expectations.
Yes. So we are the generation that's understanding them maybe a little better, but then we're all of a sudden we're expecting Gen Z, and boomers are expecting, even though we raised them in sports and academics and the things like that, we raised them to be understood and accommodated, and effort is everything. It's just we showing up. If you just show up, you get a trophy. We did that. But then we're expecting them to enter the workforce like we entered the
Yes.
workforce.
It's unfair.
Right. And so we know that. We as
Okay,
Gen
and
X, we know that. So we're trying to be more accommodating.
That makes us more sensitive.
It does. It makes us more sensitive to them coming in. And, it's like you've got your young adult who enters the workforce, and you want their bosses to be kind to them. I mean, my goodness, we've seen where the parents are showing up at interviews with them, and doing salary negotiations with them and that sort of thing. And so when another Gen Z comes into our workplace, we're thinking we need to accommodate like we want our child to be accommodated entering the workforce.
Okay.
So it's kind of this whole little mesh of we created the problem, so we want to try to understand the problem and fix the problem that we created, kind of thing, as Gen Xers.
Right.
But we've got to all put a pause on it. And what that means is when Gen X, who is not understanding, who might not be understanding, those of us that are in leadership and Gen Z enters the workforce and people are like, look, you got to show up every day. You got to be here on time. You got to do this, that, and the other. You know, the things that might be required. And Gen Z is saying, well, I think we could do this in a 4-day week. I think we could blah, blah, you know. We've got to come together then and try to
Right.
be curious and understand where we're coming from, that there's a lot of traditions that Gen X has held on to and was trained to hold on to, and even feels like integrity is falling if we don't hold on to them. We're navigating a lot as well as we're trying to accommodate Gen Z entering the workforce. And that's where we need to just stop and try to understand where each other's coming from.
So I think if I could sum it up in a visual, what you're saying is we've got Gen X here, we've got Gen Z here, and never the twain shall meet. That's not good enough. We got to figure out how to bridge that gap and bring them together.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the message here, and that's what this is all about. And to our Gen Z viewers out there, we want to make sure that you understand this is not in any way a lecture. This is not in any way a scolding of you should do this, this, this. What this is us trying to bridge that gap, to let you know where maybe some of us Gen Xers are coming from. Maybe some of your boomer bosses that are still, you know, not quite ready to exit the workforce, where we're coming from to help you succeed.
Absolutely.
Because again, we want win-win. We want to win, of course, and we want you to win as well. So that's what this is all about. So, Michelle, let's jump into some things that Gen Z needs to understand. Again, for your own benefit and ultimate good, what do you need to know about us older generations at work? And
one of the things is that we older generations often equate reliability with professionalism.
Okay.
Reliability to us looks like hardly ever calling out, not needing mental health days. And I'm not saying that's a good thing.
Oh, that's such an important point. And what we're talking about here is not, you need to understand Gen X and boomers because we got everything right. That's not at all the message. Everybody's got issues, everybody's got expectations and ways that they view the world. And if we can look at those things without judgment of whether it's right or wrong or whether it's good or bad, and just say this is what it is, and that helps put us in a position to be able to navigate it most effectively.
Absolutely. And so, just like you said, we're just letting you know what our expectations are, not saying that they're necessarily right or wrong. We may have to adjust our expectations, but you know.
So where did those expectations kind of come from?
Well,
like we said before, we're all shaped by the environment we grow up in. So is it that?
Well, we were just, we were expected to be punctual, to follow through, to make sure our responsiveness was quick, efficient, and timely. And if we were not consistent in the workforce, and we were not reliable, we were seen as unprofessional. We were not promoted. We were not promotion worthy. There were punishment and consequences for not doing these things. And it came from, being raised by the boomer generation who was raised by the traditionalists. And they just experienced hard times, and hard times didn't matter. They did things anyway, even through hard times. And so that's how we were shaped. And that's what we expect.
Sometimes to our own detriment.
Absolutely.
Because there were no real, anxiety wasn't a thing back then. And I'm sure it existed, but it was not flagged and it was not acknowledged.
Exactly.
It was not, hey, this is what I'm going through. This is harmful and damaging to me. You just put your head down and did it anyway, sometimes to your own detriment.
Absolutely. And we were often judged by that reliability and that consistency, even above talent.
Yes.
Like we could have been very talented. I don't know how many times I've heard this in my lifetime, but well, I can't trust them because they won't show up. They do such a good job, but they're not here. When they're here, they do a great job, but they're not here all the time, and so they, even though they were technically proficient or did all the right things, they had the talent and maybe even talent above others. And that kind of goes back to where we really want to focus more on people's character. And we associate reliability and trustworthiness and that sort of thing with people's character. That's what we a lot of times have assigned value to, is people's character, and then we put these particular characteristics, trustworthiness, reliability, consistency. And I know with Gen Z that if a job is not working for them, they will leave.
Yes.
And we were taught that you stick it out.
That was not a
if you
thing.
start a job, you need to stick it out for at least several years before you try to go to another job. Gen Z is saying, no, that doesn't work for me. I'm not going to waste years of my life in
Right.
something that's not working.
And I think, to their credit, there's a lot to be said for that.
And then there's times when they've been completely overwhelmed for whatever reason may be going on in their life. And they're like, it's not worth it to me to go to work today in the state of mind that I'm in. I'm going to stop and take care of myself.
Isn't it all about trade-offs?
It is.
We were, in our generation, in our day, what was valued as being a willingness to trade off your own peace of mind and personal satisfaction and whatever you want to call it, even mental health sometimes, for the greater good of fulfilling my obligation to be at work today or whatever. And now this current generation is, because of the way they were shaped, they have a different set of values that they're subscribing
That is very
to.
true. But I think the really important thing maybe for this particular point is that before people trust your ideas, they're going to need to trust your reliability. And that is something that Gen Z will need to think about and consider as they're navigating the workforce.
Very good. Let's talk about communication and particularly communication style a little bit. So I think the point here is older generations, the Gen X and the boomers, they may have different views of what professional communication looks like. Talk about that a little.
So the older generation values and sees, personal communication as a sign of respect. And so where Gen Z will be kind of getting them, just get the message out there kind of thing. Efficiency. The slang, the acronyms, the things
the
that, emojis to communicate. Older generations show it seems more professional and as a sign of respect among the peers if you are communicating, if you take time to communicate well. Slow down, be more personal with your communication.
Even like please and thank you, or dear so-and-so, sincerely Michael.
Yeah, or when you start, not just with the message, but, hey, Michelle, just even
greetings.
that, just a little greeting and a wrap-up or whatever. And, Gen Z's been taught to use emojis literally to communicate.
And honestly, I get it. If we're honest, us older generations, we're a little stuffy in that way. But it was because, again, of how we were brought up and the things that were valued more back in our day, in our formative years and things, that's changed.
Yeah.
So again, it's perspective and putting yourself in the shoes of the person on the other side of the desk.
And I think generally our generation thinks a little more personal touch, at least at the beginning of like maybe working on a project. you're going to have better understanding, we feel like, if you have a personal touch first with either a phone call or a face-to-face meeting, or a Zoom meeting where you can have a little more body language that's read, setting a tone for it so that there's not assumptions made.
Right.
We value
Right.
those kinds of things, where Gen Z would probably just prefer everything be text. Have you ever texted someone and they call you?
Quite frequently.
And so we have a little bit of a rub about that sometimes, even as Gen X. Gen Z, to the nth degree, they often feel more comfortable with the less personal communication on certain things. Now, there's some exceptions to that. They, in the workforce, they do crave interaction from their boss. They crave coaching. They crave a pat on the back, understanding, validation. But the difference and the nuance of this right here that we're talking about is that Gen Z is coming at it from a point of me.
Right.
So when they're craving that communication, they're craving the communication of, come check on me. Come take care of me. Come coach me along the way. Come guide me along the way, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not. There's
and
nothing
it's
wrong with
something
that. We all
can
do that.
absolutely, and we as leaders need to build our chops on that. But for this right here, sometimes Gen Z will, when it's time for them to initiate and take the charge on a project, or initiate the communication, it's safer to them for them to initiate it in a less personal way. And so that's kind of the nuance of this particular communication problem that we're talking about now. Sometimes you have to be the one to go communicate. And so Gen X needs to hear and understand, and to see that you are ready to communicate and take the initiative and be mature enough to come, let's have this conversation. It can't always be your boss coming to you. There's going to be times when, for trust to be built in your reliability, in your competency, that sort of thing, that you have the younger generations coming and communicating. Now, we've got to make sure that we're not so busy that we don't take time to hear when they come to us.
Absolutely.
And not to make it awkward for them. They're already having a hard time, maybe showing up at our office door or talking to us on the phone. They had to pick up the phone and dial numbers, so this was hard for them, and it was intimidating to do that. So we have
we
to
need to
make
appreciate it
ourselves,
and give credit for that. And I think the biggest takeaway that I'm getting from all of this is, it's okay. We all naturally see from our own perspective, and that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if we'll take the time and make the effort to see from the other person's perspective.
Yes.
I know what I need. That comes very naturally to me. That's always at the front of my mind. What do you need?
Yes.
Gen Z colleague, Gen X colleague, if I'm a Gen Z, and try to accommodate that and give that as much as possible. Okay.
Yeah. And just the last thing, for, if I could just say this, a lot of times our convenient communication and effective communication, they're not always the same thing.
Oh, that's good.
And so that's just really the point of this. What's convenient for me is not what's always effective.
Not always what's going to land with you. That's so good. I love that. Let's talk about credibility. So I think there's this kind of idea from Gen Z as they enter the workforce, at least a perception from some of us older generations is, they feel like they want credibility just like that as they enter the workforce. And that's different from the way we viewed it back in the Gen X and Boomer days.
For sure. And, the bottom line on this one is, some people, it's not like they distrust you, but they just don't believe trust should be handed out. They believe that trust should be built.
It's a process.
So, and so don't assume that trust is just going to be handed to you. And that's hard, I think, for Gen Z in general because they know so much.
Yeah.
Or they have access to information. And they're like,
It's
why
not
not?
like they're coming in with nothing. They've got a lot
No,
to offer.
absolutely. And they also see where you're not doing it well. So why don't you trust me just to help you do this better?
Yeah.
But we were not raised that it was like that. We were raised in
Pay your dues.
pay your dues, but we were raised to be a little more skeptical. We became a very skeptical generation after seeing, probably started even with like the Vietnam War and the politics, and the news started changing, and we started realizing that all the information that's just handed to you through media is not necessarily accurate. And so
And that was a big change from the previous generation.
Absolutely.
Because they had their Walter
Cronkite.
Cronkites and whoever the trusted news people of the day,
Right.
and when they said it, you could take it to the bank. And then the landscape started to shift, and
We started realizing that not everybody in power was out for the greater good.
Yes.
And we started becoming skeptical of things. So as if you're telling me you've got this good knowledge from a YouTube video or the internet, well, we're like, we don't believe everything.
our natural response is, okay, buddy.
We're
And that's
quite skeptical.
we probably swung the pendulum too far the other way.
Maybe so.
But the point, again, is this is where the older generations are coming from. So to the extent that you can flag that, understand it, and kind of play to it a little bit, you're
Yes.
going to be that much more
And
effective in
if you
dealing
can
with
just
us.
help validate where you're getting your information, what you're bringing to the table, that helps build trust even more. Just not that it's some, as you're coming to the table, just take it a little bit slow in the beginning and let the Gen Xers know that you're, here to stay. You've got, you're building your character. That's what starts building that trust, and that's what starts building your credibility. So just showing up is not enough to have credibility with us, unfortunately.
Very good. So let's talk about institutional memory a little bit. So us older generations, we've been around a while.
Yep.
And a lot of times we've even been around in this particular work environment for a while because that's the way things were. I've said it, I don't know if our Gen Z viewers have ever even heard this or if it'd be meaningful to you, but back in my day, it was 30 years and a gold watch. You went to work for a company, a lot of times either right out of high school or college, stayed with that company, kept your head down, hopefully rose up through the ranks a little bit, and at the end of 30-year career, you got a nice handshake and a gold watch, and you went off into your retirement. We understand that that's not the way the world works anymore, but there are still those of us around who that's been our experience. And we value that perspective that we have and that context that we have from having gone through all of that. And we place a value on that can't necessarily be replaced or replicated or duplicated or brought in any other way besides having done that. So a brand new Gen Zer fresh into the company, of course, full of good ideas, new ideas. Why do you do it this way? We know those things because we lived through it all. And again, it makes us a little skeptical of some fresh-faced newbie to the workforce coming in and having ideas. And I get that Gen Z wants to be heard. I would want to be heard too. But I think that's maybe a reason why we're a little bit slow to accept
Absolutely.
those kind of new ideas.
I think this sums it up really well. If Gen Z could hear this, a lot of times what looks outdated is actually like scar tissue, if you could think of it like that. it's like what looks outdated is something that we went through and had a hard time with, and it took ups and downs and battles and whatever, and we finally got to a point till we figured out what actually worked for this company, for this particular situation. And so yes, it may look outdated, but we scratched and figured it out for ourselves. Now that's not to say that we should accommodate outdated, and just because that's we
Right.
finally figured it out and by God we're never changing it. No, that we have to, and this is where I've always advocated for, let Gen Z get at the table and
Yes.
start telling you some stuff. Listen to them and guide them through their ideas. Guide them through, well, this part of your idea would actually work. This part will not, because we've already tried that in a different format and it did not. So it's the two coming together. And Gen Z has to be willing to see the scars and
Right.
understand where the scars are coming from, and why there may be some really old, antiquated process that's out there that we had to accommodate.
And I think the point again is appreciating where the other person is coming
Always.
from, and being willing to acknowledge, okay, I don't really understand this, but there's probably a good reason why they think, behave, act, whatever, like they're thinking. Giving credit to the other person, that there's probably something there.
I think it's just, if you could just say, why do we do it this way? What's the reasoning behind? It's curiosity.
You said it in the very beginning.
Start with just being curious. Why are we doing it this way? And I think that's going to lead us to, Gen X then has to say, well, I don't know why we're doing it that way. Or we're doing it that way because this.
Yeah.
And then Gen Z can come back and say, okay, well, because of this, you can now do this, and da 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 da. Curious. Just be curious with each other.
So, Michelle, it's becoming very clear that we're going to have to make a part 2 out of this. We've
Okay.
got much more content
Yeah.
than we do time left. Let's tackle this one last
Okay.
thing about how we see work.
Okay.
Us older generation saw work as our identity, our
Yes.
duty.
Yes.
And it was the thing we talked about earlier. Put your head down and power through and just endure. Gen Z sees it differently.
Yeah, and when we were raising Gen Z, what's your passion? What do you care about? Nobody ever asked me what I care about. They said, get a job, get a house, get a car.
Those are the things you should care about.
Right.
It's different now.
And we raised them to live life with meaning
Yes.
and purpose, and they're taking it seriously.
And that's a good thing.
And it is a good thing, because you're going to be more effective. When you figure out your why,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what the what is. You're going to work your why into whatever you're doing. And we love that, and we're advocates for that. But to understand Gen X, Gen Zers, please stop and just think about the fact that we were raised on longevity meant something.
We valued that.
Whatever, if you worked if you were an inspector at the chicken plant, that became your identity.
Yeah.
If you were a school teacher, that became your identity. If you were, whatever it might have been, whatever
The
your job
mailman,
was.
whatever
Yes.
it was. And
Yes.
I'm tagging people as your.
Yeah, I mean, we know the people
Yeah.
that they became that, and that became their identity. And I'm not even knocking that.
No.
I'm not even saying that that's a bad thing. That was a good thing, and it was noble in the community for you to have been the mailman for 50 years. And we need mailmen. I mean, but Gen Z sees it so much differently than that.
Yeah.
And so if you could just stop and think about why we're a little bit concerned if you can't stay on a job more than 3 or 4 months, or you're changing jobs. That's the reason why. That's where it's
We're
coming
seeing it
from.
through our lens.
We're seeing it through our lens.
Yeah. And I do want to point out that I think there's a lot of good perspective on this particular thing that we get from Gen Z, because what came along with the way the older generations approached this thing that we're talking about, this longevity and kind of perseverance thing, is they endured a lot of hardships that maybe they didn't have to. Maybe they could have made their lives better if, instead of being, I'm going to be the chicken plant inspector, I'm going to be the mailman for 30 years. Those are low paying, in the grand scheme of things, fairly low paying jobs. There might have been more out there for some of these people if they had been less risk averse and more willing to roll the dice and take a chance and whatever. Gen Z is very good at understanding that and being willing to take those kind of chances. Smart
I
risk.
see Gen Z as being much less risk averse, and they are entrepreneurial. I didn't know that many entrepreneurs in my lifetime.
No.
You know, in the small communities that I lived in. And we need more entrepreneurs. We need people starting and doing new things. So I generally speaking, if we're going to kind of put a period here and try to wrap up, you know, more than anything, just try to understand why we're there. And I think Gen X leaders are, if they're challenged a little bit, you know, by Gen Z, if they're like, why do you feel that way? I think we'll stop and think about it and be willing to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Most of my peers and leaders that we're working with now, they want to understand, they want to do better, and they want to lead well. And I think we're a little more curious than previous generations were. We're less demanding and we're a little more curious, thank goodness. And I think that Gen Z will do really well if you come alongside us and be curious as well.
I love it. So let's land the plane there.
All
I
right.
want to thank you for spending a few minutes with us in the M Squared Leadership Conversation. I think this has been a good one.
Yeah.
We'll have to do part 2.
It went
'cause
by
there's
way
so
too
much
fast.
more to cover here. Remember, leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's being willing to ask better questions. And so, Michelle, everybody, until next time, stay curious, lead well, and let's keep the conversation going.
Bye, guys.